common symptoms that we hear about when we are struggling with our thyroid health is fatigue. I see this all the time in my practice, and a lot of people really have a hard time, first of all, understanding where the fatigue is even coming from, some of the main causes, and then what you can do about it. So I want to share some of my tips with you on how you can figure out what's causing the fatigue, besides just the fact of having underactive thyroid, but also tips that you can do as well. So one of the first things that I would consider when you are really dealing with a lot of fatigue, and this is whether or not you actually already do have a diagnosed condition of hypothyroidism, or maybe your thyroid panel looks completely normal, is to make sure that they're ruling out if there's an autoimmune connection. So if we have something called Hashimoto's, this is actually the number one cause to hypothyroidism. 90 to 95% of people with hypothyroidism actually have this autoimmune condition. And this is where our immune system, it's an autoimmune disorder, but our immune system attacks our thyroid, and that can lead to massive thyroid symptoms, including fatigue, and definitely other things like weight gain and brain fog and things like that. But fatigue is a really big one. So that's something that I would definitely rule out, and make sure if you are dealing with hypothyroidism and you're like, I'm still really dealing with fatigue, I'm taking my thyroid meds, make sure that they have ruled out and looked at, do you actually have this autoimmune condition? Do you have positive thyroid antibodies? The other thing to also keep in mind is that, if we do already have something like Hashimoto's, let's say we already have been diagnosed with that, it's really common as well for when you have one autoimmune condition to have other autoimmune conditions, such as things like celiac or pernicious anemia, even like rheumatoid arthritis and lupus. So make sure that they also have ruled out any other autoimmune conditions, because that can be a huge connection as well. Something else that I wanted to mention as well is, when we have something like hypothyroidism, determining the type of hypothyroidism sometimes is key as well, because if you have, let's say that it is a true thyroid issue where the thyroid's not producing enough thyroid hormone, then we know that the thyroid itself needs some more love and care and things like that. But maybe there's an issue with the brain. So our brain, our pituitary gland, in our brain releases something called thyroid stimulating hormone. This is what they actually check on blood testing to tell you if you have underactive thyroid or overactive thyroid. So you can know if you're making too much thyroid hormone or not making enough thyroid hormone. Let's say that there's a pituitary gland issue. If we have something going on with that gland or the brain issue, that's a different kind of ball game. So maybe, trying to figure out that sort of thing as well. Also keep in mind too that, speaking of like different types of underactive thyroid, so the other factor to consider is, okay, we talked about the thyroid itself, we talked about the pituitary gland itself, but maybe there's something called thyroid hormone resistance. And this is where maybe you're taking thyroid hormone medication already, and you don't really notice any difference and you're still tired. Maybe you don't have diagnosed thyroid condition, but you're really tired. You have to make sure that those thyroid hormones are going inside the cells. And so if we don't have, something like thyroid hormone resistance, the thyroid hormones are going in the cells and doing their job. But if we do have something like thyroid hormone resistance, it won't matter how much thyroid medication you're taking, or it won't matter how much thyroid hormone shows up on your blood testing. You still have to make sure they're going inside the cells. So this is other things that I look at for something like this. We think of things like our iodine. Do we have enough iodine? Because iodine is huge for our thyroid health. They actually make up our thyroid hormones. 3 iodine molecules make T3 and 4 iodine molecules make T4. So we have to make sure we have enough iodine, and not just that, but our other minerals. So one test that I use for this, I use something called HTMA, which is called hair tissue mineral analysis. And this can actually tell us, do we have enough of the ability for our thyroid hormones to go inside the cells? And if you don't have that ability, if it's really bogged down because we have mineral imbalances or depletions, maybe we have heavy metals, we can also see that on the test. If we have that going on, again, it won't really matter how much thyroid medication you're taking, or if you're taking all the thyroid supplements in the world, you have to get that addressed and fixed. And so the easiest way to check, do we have this thyroid hormone resistance, is to look at something called HTMA. So those are kind of some of the big areas. Now, also you need to consider things like, do we have cortisol dysregulation? It's very common to have some cortisol issues when we have thyroid issues. They kind of go hand in hand. So if we have, maybe we're making enough cortisol, but we're not using it, or maybe we're not making enough cortisol at all, that's going to cause an immense amount of fatigue. So you also have to take a look at what your cortisol is doing, because this is a huge factor. And sometimes we can get minerals addressed all day long, but if our cortisol isn't working right, you're going to really struggle with fatigue. And like I said, they go hand in hand. And even our sex hormones can be dramatically affected by what our thyroid hormones are doing. So think about it like this. We can look at thyroid blood testing all day long, and sometimes the blood testing looks good and sometimes it doesn't. But regardless of what that looks like, you still have to think about the other areas that are being impacted by what our thyroid hormones are doing, regardless of being diagnosed with a thyroid condition or not. Because that thyroid hormone resistance will take hold, and you can have it in combination with having hypothyroidism or Hashimoto's, or things like that, or it can be completely all by itself. And this is when you have a scenario where you're like, I'm really tired, but my thyroid blood test looks normal. That's the thyroid hormone resistance scenario. So start thinking about all these other factors that you have to test and assess, and things that be contributing. If you have inflammation of your thyroid, you have nodules, a goiter, things like that, anything, or even cyst around your thyroid, that can dramatically affect how you're making thyroid hormone and how you're using thyroid hormone. So start thinking about all those other factors, like, did you rule all these areas out? Now, how do you deal with the fatigue? The biggest area is what I mentioned, is to assess the HTMA, to assess your minerals and metals. I like it on hair because it's a 3-month average. That's going to give us a lot of information, a conclusive amount of information. That's the easiest way to get your body to use your thyroid hormones if they aren't, using them right. And then, minerals are like your little spark plugs. So they give all the energy in the world. So that's the first place that I would start. And then start thinking about, did I rule out all these other areas? Are my adrenals working right? Is my cortisol working right? Maybe you have gut pathogens. If we have gut pathogens, that's going to really slow down fatigue. And it's very common to have leaky gut and gut pathogens and things like that with underactive thyroid, especially with Hashimoto's. So just start kind of thinking about other areas that you need to rule out. And the other factor is the dietary portion. If you're eating a lot of inflammatory foods, it's going to really bog you down. So, cutting out things like sugar and gluten, dairy for some. If you have Hashimoto's, a lot of people have to cut dairy out. Even soy, things like that. They're very inflammatory. So other areas that you need to think about is the dietary part, and then of course sleep. That goes without saying. If you're not getting enough sleep, and we're talking restful sleep, it's always gonna, at some point, it's gonna give some feedback to your body, and it's gonna really start slowing you down. So just start thinking about, what other areas can I address? What other areas have I not addressed? And then have I ruled out all these other factors? Have I done any other testing? So if you have any questions with the test that I mentioned, let me know on that, and I can definitely send you some more information on where to get started. I hope this video helped you, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.